Well, good morning, everybody. So, you've had this experience, I'm sure, of trying to walk around in the dark, move around in the dark where you can't quite see what's going on. Had a fresh experience of this week at family camp. Those of you who are there, you got to negotiate the various trails between different parts of the campground without much light. But one of my most vivid memories of an experience of trying to move around in the dark was when I was a teenager. I was spending the night at a friend's house, and we were playing video games in the basement, up in the middle of the night, whatever. For some reason, I had to go upstairs, and, no one was awake upstairs. It was all dark, and so I was making my way back downstairs, and I was headed down their long hallway, or not super long, I guess, but this hallway was lined up right with the opening for the stairwell that would go straight down. And there was some kind of light flickering up from down in the basement, and I could see this white square, which I thought was the opening to the stairwell. But what I was actually seeing was the square wall on the far end of the opening to the stairwell. So I was moving at a pretty brisk pace in the dark, and I just nonchalantly power walked right off that top step and tumbled down the stairs, and thankfully I didn't hurt myself too badly. I don't recall, at least. So it's challenging, right? And then on top of that, you have this aspect of moving around in the dark where we seem hardwired to be afraid of the dark, especially if you're in the woods. You can't see what's going on, and that can be deeply unsettling. So I think for a variety of reasons like this, light and darkness really belong to universal religious symbolism. It's probably a safe bet if you look at any spiritual or religious approach in the world. You will probably find some usage of this imagery of light and dark. Light is usually for good, for truth, for enlightenment, something like this. Darkness, probably lies, deception, evil. And so it's no surprise that this, as sort of universal religious symbolism, runs all throughout the Bible. So, for example, just look at the second verse right at the very beginning of the Bible on the screen. This is Genesis 1:2. Now the earth was formless and empty, and what was over the surface of the deep? Of course, darkness, because darkness stands for threat, for chaos, for evil, if you will. So what is the very first thing that God does? He says, let there be light. And so you can actually trace this theme of God's battle with darkness from the very beginning of the story of the Bible down through the end. So look here at the last chapter of the Bible, Revelation 22, describing heaven, describing the new heavens, the new earth, whatever precisely is envisioned. Look at this description. There will be no more night. They will not need the light of a lamp or the light of the sun, for the Lord God will give them light. So darkness will be defeated in the end. So today we're going to zero in on a teaching of Jesus that draws on this imagery of light and dark. Now, if you've been around here for a while, you may have noticed that like every week I say, this is a key passage, which I should stop saying, because if you say that about everything, there is no key passage. So for once, I'm going to tell you, this is not a key passage, all right? This is not a key teaching of Jesus. This is actually rather a very obscure teaching of Jesus. And as we're going through different sayings and encounters with Jesus found in the Gospels of Matthew and Luke this summer, in this month I wanted to zero in on what I'm calling hard sayings, like difficult things, either because of their challenge or frankly like this one, just because it's really hard to figure out. So this is a little passage you've probably never heard a message on in church before. I never have. And frankly, it's hard to figure out. Like this is not going to make the top 10 list of any teaching of Jesus. This is never going to be a key verse in a vacation Bible school program. If it is, they're probably going to get it wrong. And it's a head scratcher. It's one of these deals where it's not entirely clear what Jesus is talking about. And I called this series Riddles from Q because sometimes the teachings of Jesus have this enigmatic riddle sort of nature to them, which is more interesting than just some simple statement. Black is bad and light is good. Like, okay, well, that's not very interesting. But sometimes these confusing, challenging, sort of mysterious riddles can be evocative and draw us in and force us to wrestle with it and figure out what is going on. So, on the other hand, Jesus clearly intends this saying to be some kind of warning to us. And he intends it to be a sober, difficult, challenging kind of warning. So it will be of value for us to try to muddle through and figure out. And if we think we can arrive at a place of understanding what precisely Jesus means in this passage, the payoff's going to be perhaps, okay, we're going to understand a teaching of Jesus. Most people, frankly, have no clue. It's not on their radar. So it may be that in this saying, Jesus has put the cookies on the top shelf, as it were. And as it's difficult for us to reach and pin down precisely what he's saying, perhaps the reward will be worth it. And I think it will be. That's why we're here. So I hope you grabbed one of the bulletins when you came in. I have our layout of the passages we'll be looking at in there. Those of you online, hello. You can download a PDF of the sermon notes on there, and that will be some help to you. Okay, so let's look at this together. If you glance at your outline, notice, by definition, this material from this thing called Q. Q is a name that Bible scholars use for what many suspect is a written source that was used by both Matthew and Luke in the writing of their gospel. So this is material that's in Matthew and Luke's gospel that's not in Mark. And so notice on your outline, there's that one paragraph that matches, almost word for word in many cases. And you'll see there's a lot of other passages or other verses around these passages I've given you on your outline. But we're really interested in that matching section right in the middle. Here's the key saying or teaching we're going to focus in on. And so let's just look at it together. Look at Matthew's version on the left, and I would like you to read this out loud with me with your voices. Okay, here we go. The eye is the lamp of the body. If your eyes are healthy, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eyes are unhealthy, your whole body will be full of darkness. If then the light within you is darkness, how great is that darkness? Okay, what does that mean? I mean, that's strange. So imagine you have a friend who comes to you, maybe they've not read much of the Bible, and they know you go to church sometimes. You're like, hey, Bob, Bill, Jane, Sue, whatever. Listen, I like, God, give me a message. And I open the Bible, and I found this verse, but I don't know what it means. You help me understand it. And they read you this verse. They say, okay, you know church stuff. What does that mean? What do you tell them? All right, let's do this. I'm going to give you 2 minutes. What's that? Call Greg? Yeah, but before this week, I had no idea what I was talking about either. What's that? Google commentary. That's good advice. That'll help us understand the passage. Okay, but if you can whip it out on your phone and get a commentary real fast, you can do it now, but you probably don't have time. I'm going to give you 2 minutes. Imagine the Jeopardy song playing. I want you to look at that verse. Try to figure out, what does that mean? What would you say to your friend? And then we'll share a few things. So please, have a look at it. Well done. Good job, John Clark. Well done. Man, he's fast. We didn't have that first service. That's such an effective piece of music. I mean, that is just well done musically. Okay, so we're kind of like just a glorified small group gathering Bible study here today. What do you think? What do you observe about this? Any suggestions? And look, it's clear that it's not clear what this means. So if you're like, well, I don't really know, but I'll guess something, go for it. What do you think? Yeah.
It could be how you view things.
Okay.
Truthfully or if you cover them up.
Okay, could be how you view things, whether you see things truthfully or cover them up. Yeah, so clearly, right, it seems to have something to do with perception and how we see. Absolutely, excellent. Yes. Yes, in the back. Okay, if you read the same thing and replace the word I with soul, okay, so that's interesting. So this suggests to us that perhaps Jesus' concern here is not really physical vision, but spiritual vision. So I like that suggestion. That's a good idea. What else? Yeah. Okay, so maybe it speaks to something about what we put into our lives and what comes out. So if there's a lot of negative content or sinful content, it's going to mess us up. And okay, that's That's plausible. Yeah. Any other observations or thoughts? That was it. You vote for that one? Okay, that's good. John. Yeah. So John says many religions will look at light and darkness, and it could be a false religion. Actually, someone in first service said something about, she read a book called Beautiful Evil. What's that? The Beautiful Side of Evil. That's scary. You know, because we can recognize evil as such when it shows up scary or like a death camp. But what about evil? Can evil come to us looking beautiful and attractive? That is very sobering. So, yeah. And one of the interesting things about this is, you know, this is a saying of Jesus, this little teaching. And sometimes the sayings of Jesus, it seems, circulated somewhat independently. And so sometimes they can be placed in different contexts, and that'll impact how they're read differently. And we'll see that actually here in Matthew and Luke, that the saying has ended up in two different contexts, which kind of points off in two different directions in terms of meaning. But most basically, I think we could say this, that it seems to have something to do with perception, right? Because it's talking about eyes. And there's going to be something sort of external that's going to have some sort of internal impact on us. But let's see what we can do and walk through this together, and I'll suggest to you kind of where I ended up with this. Look at the first line. It's almost the same in both Matthew and Luke. Well, I'll read Matthew's on the left, verse 22. Notice the eye is the lamp of the body. That's interesting. If I were you, I'd circle that word lamp. There's a key word. Okay, what does a lamp do? Sheds out light. Now, in what direction does a lamp usually send light? Outward. So immediately that seems a little bit of an uneasy fit, because he says our eyes are like lamps. And at first we might suggest that our lamps are sending out light. So I was reminded of the animated version of The Hobbit, which I watched as a kid. Look at this screen. Look at the picture of Smaug the dragon in this old cartoon. Anyone remember this movie? The greatest adventure. Glenn Yarbrough sings the theme. So nice. So here's Smaug the dragon. What's going on with his eyes in this picture? I mean, there's like, his eyes are lamps. There's light going out. So we might think that's what Jesus is saying, first of all. But then the rest of the verse, he goes on to talk about this light or darkness inside of us. So look at the rest of Matthew saying, if your eyes are healthy, your whole body will be full of light. So now it's talking about something inside of us. If your eyes are unhealthy, your full body will be full of darkness. So now he seems to be talking about the eyes as an organ that is letting light into the body. So that's a little unusual. But I was interested to learn that maybe what's going on in this imagery is actually has something to do with the sort of current scientific and philosophical beliefs in Jesus' day about how the eye worked. It's very interesting that in the background of Greek philosophy, they had a theory that how vision worked was the eyes actually sent out light and it mixed with whatever was out there, and then it came back, and that's how vision worked. So look at this passage. This is from Plato, the famous philosopher, and here he is doing the best he can to figure out how vision works. And look what he says about how the gods, their gods, made the eye. He says, of the organs, the gods, constructed first light-bearing eyes. The eyes have light. And they fixed them in the face for the reason following. They contrived that all such fire as had the property of not burning, but of giving a mild light, should form a body akin to the light of every day. For they caused the pure fire within us, which is akin to that of day, to flow through the eyes in a smooth and dense stream, and they compressed the whole substance, and especially the center of the eyes, so that they occluded all other fire that was coarser, and allowed only this pure kind of fire to filter through. So whenever the stream of vision is surrounded by midday light, it flows out like unto like, and coalescing therewith, it forms one kindred substance along the path of the eye's vision, wheresoever the fire which streams from within collides with an obstructing object without, and I know, bear with me, and this substance, having all become similar to in its properties because of its similar nature, distributes the motions of every object it touches, or whereby it is touched, throughout all the body, even unto the soul, and brings about that sensation which we now call seeing. Like, wow. Wow. I mean, they were doing the best they could, right? So notice there was this theory apparently in some circles of the ancient world. They're like, well, how eyes work is they shoot out fire or light. It matches other things and the light comes back. Okay, so maybe that explains some of the strangeness of the language of portraying eyes as lamps that we could picture sending out light, and yet Jesus also treats them as sort of windows to the inside of us, allowing a light inside. Now, is Jesus concerned with the scientific precision of how eyes work? Okay, clearly not. Just using the language and idioms and understandings of his day. Maybe he's saying this because of this. Maybe it has nothing to do with it. I don't know, but it's interesting to consider. So here's the closest I could come to this. And I tried real hard, guys, and it failed. Okay, look on the screen. I tried to order these. I was like, okay, what could I come up with for some sort of illustration where I could have my eyes light up to send out light so I could see better? I thought, oh, look at these safety goggles. These safety glasses have lights built in. I was like, that'll be nice. I can put those on stage, and there'll be nice glowing lights right here. I'll be see like, maybe this is like the ancient conception. In the dark, see, my eyes would send out these lights and bounce back, and so I can see. But guess what happened? I opened the box from Amazon last night at about 11 p.m., 11:30, and guess what Amazon sent me? Normal safety glasses with no lights. All right, so there went that idea, though they are awfully nice safety glasses, more expensive than they should have been. Okay, but you get the idea. Like, this is perhaps the ancient understanding of light, is our eyes send out light, and so we can see, and light comes back in. Okay, whatever. That's all very weird, and it adds to the confusion of the passage. Okay, most simply, what is clear about this passage thus far, I think we could say this. Jesus seems to be saying that light, whatever it is, in this passage is necessary for the proper functioning of the body. And we should take the body probably to refer to the whole person, not just our physicality. So Jesus says something like, whatever light is, it's important to the function of the body. Yes, go like this. And whether or not that light gets into the body properly is going to have to do with the quality of the eyes. However, we understand that, right? Go like this. All right, so we can say this much so far. Now, our eyes, are these organs of digestion, procreation, or perception? Perception. You said something about eyes and what we see. So clearly something about what Jesus is talking about has to do with perception. And we can probably guess and have a hunch that Jesus' interest is not essentially and primarily physical perception, we've already said this, but very plausibly spiritual perception, seeing or receiving some sort of spiritual something. All right, does that sound plausible thus far? I think so. Okay, let's keep going here. What is needed then for our spiritual perception, we might say, right? Spiritual perception, is that a fair way to think about this? Spiritual perception. What is needed for our spiritual perception to function? Look at Matthew's second line. If your eyes are healthy, your whole body will be full of light. Circle that word healthy. It doesn't seem strange, but actually the word Jesus uses here is strange. Literally in Greek, it's the word single. So really Jesus says, if your eye is single, in the sense of single-minded, one purpose, in the sense of not duplicitous, so that's weird. And this term seems to have both a medical meaning and a ethical meaning. First of all, the medical meaning, if someone says eye is single, what could be the medical contrast if your eye wasn't working? If we say, well, sometimes if something goes wrong with our vision, we might have what? Double vision. You know, put your thumb out in front of your eye like this. This mystified me as a kid. Like, kids, if I get boring in the sermon, you can always do this, all right? You hold your thumb out. Don't focus on your thumb. Look past your thumb. Now, how many thumbs do you see? You see one thumb? Well, you do, but look past your thumb. Like, look at me and hold your thumb up, and how many thumbs do you see? You see one. Most of us see two thumbs because I'm seeing one with each eye, right? You see how that works? And look, what's interesting is I can see through it. as well. Like Natasha's in the front row. I can look at her and I can see through that thumb and still see her. And I move over, I can see her through. This baffled me as a kid. Like, first of all, why am I seeing two thumbs and why can I see through it? Right? And of course, this is because there's two images coming, one image coming from each eyeball. And if we're not focusing, they're not brought together, right? Okay. So I actually have glasses, which I never wear, which is unfortunate because glasses are very valuable to look serious, and they are especially powerful to take off, to make strong points. You can take them off and gesture with them. Now, actually, my vision is good in the sense of focus and clarity, but I have something called convergence dysfunction, which is up close, my eyes have a hard time actually focusing and lining up properly. So for a while, I would get headaches when I would read. I went to the eye doctor. They said, oh, you have something called convergence dysfunction. And so they gave me these, which are prisms, which it's bad if I look over. But up close, it really helps me see. But they told me the problem is convergence dysfunction comes because your eye muscles are weak, and they're not good at bringing your eyes together. And they said, you can wear these, and they will help. But in the end, it will just contribute to weakening your eye muscles. And the better thing to do would be do these exercises. Well, while you brush your teeth, you stand there and like focus on your thumb. See, I do that a lot. And so anyway, I did that and it ended up helping, so I never have to wear them. So there's the medical sense of this term, which is why the NIV translates this healthy. Well, what's a healthy eye? It's a single eye in the sense of it's not double vision. Okay, but interestingly, this term, and again, this is a riddle. Like Jesus is really tricky with this one because these words have double meanings. This word has a double meaning. It has a medical meaning, but it also has an ethical meaning in the way this terminology was used in the first century. So notice on your outline, I put a footnote. This footnote is coming right out of your NIV Bible translation. If you look on the page of your Bible, and at least the new NIV, I don't know about the old one, you'll see a footnote, and it'll say this on the bottom of the page. Look, I put it on your outline. They say, for this word, single, the Greek for healthy here implies generous. The Greek for unhealthy here implies stingy. Okay, well, there's something we never would have guessed, that this terminology has connotations of having to do with finances of all things. So I forgot to put it on the screen, but if you were to look at Romans 12:8, Paul's talking about gifts. He says this, if your gift is to encourage people, then give encouragement. If your gift is giving, then give generously. And in Greek, that word generously is related to this word, single. Similarly, so if I were you, I would write single by that healthy. Circle the word healthy, hopefully. You could write single there because that's really the word he uses, as weird as it is. And then when Jesus says, if your eye is unhealthy, interestingly, the word Jesus actually uses there is evil. So he says, if your eye is single, but if your eye is evil, then. And interestingly, this terminology of having an evil eye sometimes had the connotations of being financially stingy. Let me show you a passage. Look on the screen. This is from a Jewish book called Sirach. It's kind of like the book of Proverbs. You will find it in Roman Catholic Bibles. And look at this proverb. Look at this saying. A stingy man's eye begrudges bread, and it is lacking at his table. It sounds like Proverbs. So literally, they've translated a stingy man. Literally here it says, an evil eye begrudges bread. So this is terminology that is sometimes used for being stingy as opposed to generous. Okay, so what have we found so far? So far we've said this seems to have something to do with perhaps spiritual perception. There's some functioning of the person that is going to depend on light, whatever it is, and whether the light gets in is going to depend on the health of the eye, whatever that is, whether spiritual or otherwise. And so far we've also seen there's interesting sort of connotations having to do with finances of all things in this usage. All right, so notice. On your handout, did I give you only this key paragraph, or did I include some verses before it and after it in both books? Not a trick question, right? Yes. And so let's expand our focus a little bit, no pun intended, and let's consider the context of this saying. And this is important when interpreting the Bible because in language, it's probably not an overstatement to say context determines meaning. Context determines meaning. If I say to you, go for it, what do I mean? Yeah, but what? Do what? Oh, so we know I'm telling you to do something, but what particularly is going to depend on where we're at. So if I'm playing Ultimate Frisbee with Heath, did I see Heath out there? Yeah, there he is. He runs circles around me. If he's on my team, I'm like, okay, go for it, Heath. And I'm like this. Then we know what that means. If I'm standing with you on a 10-foot cliff over the river and we're wearing swimsuits, I say, go for it. That means something else, right? So context is going to determine meaning. And again, what's interesting is sometimes a saying or teaching of Jesus perhaps traveled independently and gets put in different places by the gospel writers, which adds different connotations of meaning to the saying. Or to look at it another way, did Jesus always say the same thing? Did Jesus only ever say anything once, or did he repeat himself? Is it conceivable that sometimes he repeated himself and put things in different contexts? Of course. So either the gospel writers have arranged it like this, or there's a remembrance that sometimes Jesus connected various sayings with different contexts for different meanings. So what's the point? Okay, well, interestingly, let's look at the context, first of all, of where Matthew plugs in this saying. So look at your left column. Starting at the top, verse 19. Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth where moths and vermin destroy and where thieves break in and steal, but store up for yourselves treasure in heaven where moths and vermin do not destroy and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. What's Jesus generally talking about there? Money. Okay, interesting. Then we have our key passage. And then drop down to verse 24 in Matthew. This is how Matthew arranges it and rounds it out, or perhaps Jesus said it this way on an occasion. No one can serve two masters. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you'll be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. So Matthew is well aware of the nuances that these terms have in terms of finances, or Jesus himself said it like this on one occasion. So notice, as we have this teaching in Matthew, it sits squarely in a context having to do with finances. So question, is it possible when we talk about our spiritual perception, understanding spiritually, is it possible that our spiritual perception could be hindered or damaged or blinded by an obsession with getting money or possessions? Is that possible? Go like this. Of course, right? I mean, here's a theme we see all throughout Jesus. So it's very possible that an overemphasis or a love of money or possessions or achieving could hinder our spiritual perception to understand and see and be impacted. So that seems to be in the Gospel of Matthew what this warning is all about. And it fits nicely with the connotations of that language having to do with finances. So it's a sober warning here against the idolatry of loving money. Okay, Luke is different. Let's look at Luke's gospel on your right column. Luke puts this teaching in a different context. And so it carries a different meaning or significance. Or again, perhaps Jesus said it this way on another occasion as well. It's a complementary meaning, not contradictory. So first of all, look what Luke puts right before our passage. Look at verse 33. This is also having to do with light. Jesus says, no one lights a lamp and puts it in a place where it will be hidden or under a bowl. Instead, they put it on its stand so that those who come in may see the light. You've heard this one. This is more familiar. You've heard the little song, This Little Light of Mine, I'm going to let it shine. You know this one perhaps. Okay, so look on the screen. We built a sauna over the last few years. And so when we designed our sauna down by the lake, we put in what is called a candle window. You see that? We had no electricity to run down here. We wanted to disconnect from this modern world. And so I was like, well, at night, how are we going to light the sauna? And traditionally, this is the way it was done with the use of a candle window. So you make a small window between your hot room and your change room, and there's a shelf on the outside of that window. You can place a candle there, and so the light from the candle will go into the hot room, yes? So we don't actually use a candle, though. We use a electric lantern. Fine, okay. Now, you will notice, perhaps, on top of the frame of that window, there are some towel hooks on top. Have you ever seen anyone put towel hooks on the top of a window frame? You ever seen anyone do that? Other than me? This is actually a mark of genius and innovation on my part. Go to the next screen. Because sometimes if you're down taking a sauna at night, you may wish to have light inside the hot room, but you do not want light out in the change room so you can sit out there and admire the stars or whatever. And so we put the hooks there, so what you can do is you take a towel and you hang it over those hooks, and that'll block the light from going out into the change room, and instead you can have light inside the hot room. That's pretty good, right? That's pretty good. That is pretty good. All right? But what if I hung a towel over the inside of the window as well? Would that make any sense? No, it wouldn't, right? And that's a transparent point of the saying that Jesus makes. And again, he's writing in a time where you have a little olive oil lantern in your home. You don't light that lantern, then put a basket over it. That will hide the light. Okay, fine. That doesn't surprise us. We're used to that imagery. But look at Luke verse 33 there, the top verse. Okay, but what does Jesus mean by that? No one lights a lamp but puts a basket over it. But you put the lamp on the table and it shines. Okay, you're used to the image, but what does that actually mean? It's not entirely clear. We'd have to look at context. Now, we're familiar with the context where Matthew puts that saying. So look at Matthew chapter, is it 5 or 6? One of the two, chapter 5. Here's the version of it we're more familiar with. Jesus says, "You are the light of the world. A town built on a hill cannot be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on its stand, and it gives light to everyone in the sauna. In the same way, let your light shine before others so that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven." Okay, fair enough. So in Matthew, that enigmatic saying about no one lights a lamp and puts it under a basket is placed in a context which shows us what it means. And in that case, Jesus is talking about doing good deeds and showing righteousness that people might see what we do and glorify God. Okay, that's fine in Matthew, but Luke doesn't have anything like that here. So the question becomes, what does this saying mean in Luke? Because again, Jesus said the same sort of thing on multiple occasions. So let's pay attention to where Jesus puts this block. Let's pay attention to where Luke puts this block of teaching in Luke's gospel. So on the right hand of your column, we have this little section from Luke. Interestingly, right before this is the section in Luke of what we talked about last week, the Beelzebub controversy. If you were here, there's a controversy over Jesus' exorcisms. Jesus gets into a dispute with the Pharisees. He says, they're saying, "You do this by the power of the devil." And Jesus says, "No, you get it wrong." And then Jesus' big punchline is, "If I, by the finger of God, drive out demons, the kingdom of God has come upon you." So the key saying there has something to do with Jesus' proclamation of the kingdom of God, which is, of course, Jesus' central teaching. Then immediately after that, in Luke, we have this on the screen. Jesus goes on and says, "As the crowds increased, Jesus said, 'This is a wicked generation. It asks for a sign, but none will be given it except the sign of Jonah. For as Jonah was a sign to the Ninevites, so also will the Son of Man be to this generation. The queen of the south will rise at the judgment with the people of this generation and condemn them. For she came from the ends of the earth to listen to Solomon's wisdom. Now something greater than Solomon is here. The men of Nineveh will stand up at the judgment with this generation and condemn it, for they repented at the preaching of Jonah. And now something greater than Jonah is here." Notice, did Jesus say someone greater than Jonah is here? Something, at least in Luke. If we were to ask Jesus, what thing is here that's greater than Jonah, what would be the answer? The kingdom of God, the reign of God, which Jesus is proclaiming. So notice right before our section here in Luke, the theme or the topic has to do with Jesus' proclamation of the kingdom. So when we hit our verse here, Luke 33 there, no one lights the lamp and puts it in a place where it could be hidden. What is Jesus talking about in Luke? Is he talking about us doing good deeds so that people see him? No. It seems to be the light that Jesus is talking about in that saying as we find it in Luke has to do with the light of the message of the kingdom that Jesus is sharing. Is Jesus hiding the message of the kingdom? Is he keeping it super secret and private? Or is he proclaiming it and trying to get people to see it and understand? Clearly the latter, right? So we're set up to see the light in Luke's version here being the message of the kingdom which Jesus is proclaiming. Okay, good. I like that. So let's keep going. Now we get to our key saying in Luke, verse 34. Your eye is the lamp of your body. When your eyes are healthy, your whole body is also full of light. But when they're unhealthy, your body is full of darkness. See to it then that the light within you is not darkness. So notice Luke has put that as an exhortation to us. We are to see to it that the light within you is not darkness. There's something we're supposed to do about this. So what is the light within us? Now, Jesus is not talking about this idea that, well, we all have light inside of us. We all have our inner truth. We all have a little bit of God inside of us that we need to discover and bring out. So that's really a kind of a pantheistic idea, or belongs more to the realm of Eastern thought. That's not what Jesus means by light within us here. In Luke's saying, what light is he talking about? What is the light that in Luke's version here he wants to come into us? Well, in the context of how he's been teaching here in Luke, the light is Jesus' message of the kingdom. The good news of who Jesus is and what he's bringing. And so in Luke, our mysterious enigmatic riddle seems to be a warning and an exhortation to keep our spiritual perception tuned so that we welcome Jesus' message of the kingdom instead of rejecting it. So is it possible for our spiritual perception to be messed up for a variety of reasons so that we miss understanding or recognizing Jesus' message of the kingdom for what it is and we fail to respond to it like we should? Absolutely. Now in Matthew, one threat that Jesus focuses on there is finances. But there's a lot of other things that can cause our spiritual perception to become damaged or not working, so we miss the message of the kingdom that Jesus is graciously offering and we fail to respond to it. So, I mean, frankly, actually this works out right as an illustration, because did this work as intended? Now, when I realized last night that these did not, in fact, have little light bulbs on them, I was very upset. So what do you think is the first thing I did? Huh? I checked what? I checked Amazon. What did I check for? What did I check? Why did I check my order? I wanted to know what? Who made the mistake? Was it me or was it Amazon? I've ordered wrong things before. And actually, that would have worked better for this illustration. It would have, actually. If it was my fault, it would have worked better. But actually, it was Amazon's fault. That's good news because I can send it back. But it's not quite as good of an illustration, because if it was my fault, then I could be like, see? I ordered the wrong thing. I made a mistake. I screwed up my spiritual perception, and that would have worked better. But here's an example of what was supposed to function and give me light. For one reason or another, something got messed up, and it did not function as it was supposed to. And so this seems to be the threat that Jesus is leveraging, or the warning he's giving us. Okay, now notice, only Luke now gives us one more line, and it's a weird one. Okay, here's another strange saying. It's another riddle, really. Look at verse 36. Jesus says, therefore, if your whole body is full of light, and no part of it is dark, it will be just as full of light as when a lamp shines its light on you. Therefore, if your whole body is full of light, and no part of it is dark, it will be just as full of light as when a lamp shines on you. This fancy word, this is called like a tautology. You know this word? It means saying the same thing twice with slightly different words. I mean, Jesus is saying, basically, well, if your body's full of light, then it will be full of light. I mean, that's weird, right? In fact, it's very possible that Matthew senses the strangeness of this saying and decides not to include it. He just like, I don't need that. That doesn't contribute much, and he leaves it out. And we will see Matthew and Luke as editors. Sometimes when they're using Mark's gospel, you'll see them hit a saying or a teaching that maybe there's some awkward grammatical problem, or there's something that you can almost sense them being a little uncomfortable with, and Luke or Matthew will sometimes interpret that to smooth it out, to make it understandable. They'll correct Mark's grammar, or they'll just skip it. And so perhaps that's what's going on in Matthew here. But actually, this works pretty good in Luke for what Luke is doing. So remember, we want to connect the light with what? What is the light we're talking about in Luke's version? It's Jesus' message of the kingdom. All right, so look at verse 33. It appears the lamp Jesus is talking about is his proclamation of the kingdom, the light of his message. Look at verse 34 and 35, warns us to tune our spiritual lamps to make sure we accept and receive the message of the kingdom. And so 36 simply says, if we let the light of the message of Jesus' kingdom into our lives, we'll be full of light. So it's just sort of a redundant way to emphasize, if we welcome Jesus' message of the kingdom, man, it's going to be good. We will receive its blessings. It will fill us, and that's good. Okay, well, I hope you were able to kind of follow me through that. It's a challenging verse. And frankly, last week, honestly, guys, I picked this one because I'm like, I have no idea what this verse is talking about, but I'm just guessing it would make a good message. And I'm guessing it would be interesting. And so we were getting ready to family camp. And Monday I was like, oh, no, I got to do this verse. I'm like, I don't even know if it'll be good or valuable. Or, I mean, of course, it's the Bible, so it'll be valuable. But you know what I mean? Like, can this verse sustain a whole sermon? I didn't know. And so I winced and read a couple of things on Monday. I was like, oh, yeah, this will work. Because it is interesting, I think. And this is a mysterious saying, riddle of Jesus, that if we dig in, I think we can actually see precisely what he's saying here. He's warning us against the dangers of losing our spiritual perception, and it's taken in two different directions, one warning in finances, one warning in more general. So bottom line, what do we learn from this? Let's say this. Keep your spiritual eyes clear. Is that fair? Keep your spiritual eyes clear? I think so. I think that's what Jesus is saying, but of course, saying it the way he does is way more interesting than just saying, keep your spiritual eyes clear, you know? There's not much mystery to that. But the way Jesus says it is more evocative and challenging. But nonetheless, here's the point, I think. Keep your spiritual eyes clear. Two suggestions, and we'll pull on both Matthew and Luke's version here. First, by being on guard against the dangers of greed and possessions. By being on guard against the dangers of greed and possessions. And we see that in Matthew's gospel real clearly. And I forgot to say earlier, remember Jesus said, if your eye is single, the light will come in. Notice how nicely that connects with what Matthew says at the bottom of our page on the left about serving two masters, both God and money. So notice if we're serving both God and money, are we going to have single vision? No, we'll be divided. So there's another neat way that ties in. Now notice what I said, and I said this deliberately, be on guard against the dangers of greed and possessions. This time I didn't say be on guard against the dangers of wealth, because actually wealth may not be the threat. The actual threat is greed and possessions. Is it possible for us to be financially poor and still be controlled by greed and possessions, whether perhaps the desperate getting of them? Yeah, so notice it's possible for us that we could be maybe the most idolatrous and the most overcome and obsessed with wealth if we don't have it. So that can cut both ways, which is interesting. But think about that, whether we're wealthy or not wealthy, if we are overwhelmed by a desire for money, overwhelmed by greed, what damage could this do to us? Does this impact how we use our time, potentially? Yeah. Does it impact what we think about and fixate on? Yeah. Could that impact relationships with people? Could that hurt our families for a variety of reasons? And of course, could that fixation keep us from responding to the kingdom of God as Jesus would have us respond? Absolutely. So a sober warning to us from Matthew. Well, from Luke, let's put it this way, more generally, by being on guard against anything hindering your acceptance of Christ's kingdom. Matthew's very specific, it seems, on financial threats. Luke leaves it wide open to anything that would hinder our spiritual perception and keep us from responding to Jesus' message of the kingdom. And what would that look like to respond to Jesus' message of the kingdom? It would be to believe it, to recognize his grace and offering it to us, and then to pledge ourselves to him. Believe he died on the cross for our sins, rose again, put our trust in him, and now we are his followers. We are citizens of his kingdom, and we seek to live a life devoted to serving him. Now, I don't know your life that much, so I put some blanks in the bottom. Look, I put first, I think the biggest danger right now to my spiritual perception is, and then one step I can take this week to combat that is, so maybe think about that. Like, is there something in your life that you can put your finger on that is perhaps hindering in one way or another your ability to receive the message of the kingdom or to see what God wants you to see and respond accordingly? And if there is such a thing, well, maybe what's one thing you could do this week to try to right that or to try to bring some balance there? Well, today we look at this passage, which is very mysterious. It's no one's favorite Bible verse, right? This was not really on our radar. It's not entirely clear what Jesus means when he says it. But I think if we dig in and really look at it like we did, I think it is pretty straightforward. It seems to be a sober warning to keep our spiritual eyes clear, to tune our spiritual perception against the dangers of love of money, possessions on one hand, and anything that would threaten our response to the kingdom on the other. So family camp this week, one night I don't know, I had to track my girls down in the field where the children run like wild animals in the dark, and it is hilarious and fun to behold. And thankfully I was like, Anastasia, Alethea, and I saw thankfully they have these shoes that sparkle when they run, and I saw these two little pairs of light up shoes coming at me. I was like, okay, all right, that's them. And they could actually kind of see their way based on the sparkle of these shoes through the woods. But far better would be my safety glasses with the flashlights that were supposed to be, because then, your hand's free, you can poke around, and it shoots out light, and you can see what you need to do. But there was a failure here. Now, thankfully, in this case, it wasn't my fault, but nonetheless, a failure of spiritual perception. And that would hinder me if I was in a situation where I was really going to depend on these. Like in the middle of the night, if I had to sneak down and make repairs to the jet ski. First of all, I can't do much more than charge the battery and pray. But if I had to do it in the night, if I was depending on these, I'm like, oh, I know what I'll do. I'll use my handy-dandy flashlight goggles. I'd be out of luck. And so Jesus' warning is for us to be on guard against this sort of thing. Thank you. Farewell.